The rainy season had just begun in the remote village of Ban Truong, nestled among the limestone hills and dense bamboo groves of northern Vietnam. Patches of red earth gleamed wetly under the gray sky, and a persistent drizzle kept villagers indoors. The marketplace, typically bustling with trade, now lay subdued under the damp hush. On one such gloomy afternoon, a small group of villagers carried a simple wooden coffin toward a family plot at the western edge of the village. Inside the coffin lay the body of Old Mother Bitch, an esteemed elder in her early 70s. Known for her boundless generosity, helping deliver newborns, mending broken pots, and offering homemade remedies, she had been a pillar of support to everyone around. Despite her kindness, she had no children of her own and no husband by her side. She lived with a distant nephew, Gwyn, who oversaw her modest household. Old Mother Bitch had fallen ill a fortnight ago. The local herbalist tried every remedy, but the fever persisted. By the time they realized her condition was fatal, she was too weak even to speak. The end came quietly at noon just 2 days prior, on a day the villagers whispered was inauspicious, according to the old lunar calendars. Rain thudded on the bamboo hats and slick ponchos of those who accompanied the funeral. A single torch flared in the daylight gloom. Gwyn walked at the front, eyes glazed with grief. While not her blood-related child, he had been raised under her roof, taught how to read, write, and respect traditions. Now with her gone, he felt an unsettling emptiness. All was quiet except for the rhythmic patter of rain on banana leaves. They placed the coffin into a shallow grave, next to an ancient banyan tree whose roots had grown knotted around stones and old offerings. A few mumbled prayers to ancestors. One of the older villagers muttered that the day was wrong, but no one dared delay the burial. They had made the coffin in haste, for the atmosphere felt strangely charged, as if lingering spirits hovered about. As they lowered the coffin, a gust of wind swept across the open field, scattering wet leaves. The old men nearly lost their grip. The coffin lurched, bumping the base of the grave. A quiet hiss of alarm ran through those present, but they managed to settle it gently. Gwyn threw in a handful of red earth, tears mixing with rain on his cheeks. They completed the burial quickly, with an uneasy sense that something was off. A villager named Dr. Tang, who served as both teacher and amateur historian, lingered after the others left. "This place," he began, looking around the graveyard. Something in the air made him shudder. He ran his fingers over a cluster of old stone markers, noticing faint inscriptions he had never seen before. Runes or symbols perhaps older than the village itself. "We must be cautious," he murmured, not entirely sure why the hairs on his arms were standing on end. By nightfall, Ban Truong was back to its hush. The soft glow of lanterns filtered through rattan blinds. Families huddled indoors, seeking warmth in pots of rice porridge. Beyond the edge of the village, in the muddy grave of Old Mother Bitch, the wind picked up, moaning as if it carried distant voices. Rain hammered the earth, occasionally exposing a corner of the hastily dug coffin. Inside Gwyn's modest house, an altar flickered in memory of Old Mother Bitch. Joss sticks burned low, casting dancing shadows along the walls. Gwyn knelt in front of the small shrine, hands pressed together, praying for her peaceful journey to the afterlife. He tried to ignore the unsettling wind that rattled the windows. In that wailing wind, he almost heard the faint echoes of a voice he recognized, calling him from afar. He turned his head sharply. Silence, only the drip of rain from the eaves outside. With a heavy sigh, Gwyn crawled into his bedding. He did not see how the candle on the altar flared for a brief moment, as though touched by a stray draft, nor did he notice the ember on the incense coil intensify, shining a bright red. Far away, near the newly filled grave, muddy water crept into the corners of the wooden coffin. As midnight approached, a dull rhythmic sound echoed, like something tapping softly from inside. The following morning, the rain had eased. A clammy fog blanketed the roads. People resumed their daily routines, though quietly, as if a collective unease rested on their hearts. Gwyn stepped out to buy some vegetables from the market, struggling to keep his mind off his recent loss. Everywhere he turned, neighbors offered hushed condolences. At the makeshift stall, Madame Lu, an old friend of Mother Bitch, took Gwyn's hand. "I dreamt of her last night," she said, voice trembling. She was standing by that big banyan tree, looking confused. She tried to speak, but her words were garbled. The old woman shivered. "You know, they say the day she passed, the stars were all wrong." Gwyn forced a smile, trying to appear strong. Deep down, Madame Lee's words unsettled him. He hurried back home, ignoring the creeping sense of dread. He busied himself with chores, reorganizing the old trunks, trying to fill the silence that was once so full of Mother Bitch's comforting presence. By late afternoon, the clouds gathered again. A cold wind howled, rustling through the bamboo grove. Gwyn stared out the window at the graveyard's direction and felt an invisible pull. Unable to resist, he set out along the winding dirt path that led to the banyan tree. The path was slippery with red mud, making each step precarious. A small shape darted through the undergrowth, startling him, a stray dog or perhaps a fox. Gwyn pressed on. When he reached the burial site, he found the grave's surface partially eroded by rain. The soil had collapsed in spots, revealing the raw edges of the coffin lid. His breath hitched. He bent low to inspect. Something seemed to have disturbed the coffin. Claw marks or scratches patterned the freshly turned earth. Did an animal try to dig it up? A primal chill spread through his chest. He whispered a prayer and used his bare hands to push more soil onto the exposed coffin. As he did, the hairs on his neck prickled, and a gust of wind made the branches of the banyan tree sway eerily. It almost felt like the tree was watching him. The moment he finished, he turned to leave, but not before noticing a single muddy handprint on the coffin lid. It looked too large to be his own. Back at home, Gwyn tried to shake off the encounter. He locked the door carefully at dusk. The wind outside intensified once more, and as night fell, a deep hush enveloped the village. Late into the evening, while reading by the flickering oil lamp, Gwyn heard a faint scratching noise at his front gate. At first, he dismissed it as wind-blown branches. Then came the whisper, soft, almost drowned by the wind. Yet it was undeniably Mother Bitch's voice calling his name. Gwyn, let me in, let me in. He froze. The lamp flame sputtered. A paralyzing fear seized him. He forced himself to step into the front room, approaching the wooden gate. The whispers became a low, steady chant, calling his name over and over, dissolving into the night breeze. Summoning his courage, Gwyn unlatched a small viewing slot in the gate. Outside, the muddy road lay empty under a thin moon. No footprints, no shape, nothing. Yet he could still hear it, her voice, drifting from everywhere and nowhere. He slammed the slot shut, heart hammering. Then came 3 distinct knocks on the gate. Top, top, top. Just like something tapping from inside a coffin. Mother, he called, voice trembling. No reply came. The knocks ceased. The wind rattled the leaves. That night, Gwyn slept fitfully. Each time he drifted off, he dreamt of the banyan tree. In the dream, the trunk split open like a monstrous mouth. Rain gushed from the fissure, revealing a hollow interior where Mother Bitch stood, reaching out. Her face was gaunt, eyes clouded with longing or desperation. When he tried to step forward, the tree closed, swallowing her figure. He awoke drenched in sweat, the echo of Gwyn, "Let me in," still clinging to his mind. Word traveled fast about the strange happenings near old Mother Bitch's resting place. Several villagers claimed they had seen a hunched figure wandering after sundown, wearing a tattered alba resembling the one Bitch wore for decades. Some swore it was a shadow, while others believed it to be an animal rummaging for scraps. Dr. Tang, the local historian, became increasingly concerned. He visited Gwyn one afternoon, carrying a stack of old scrolls and a leather-bound journal. The two sat on low stools in Gwyn's main room, a small teapot steaming between them. "There's an old legend in this region," Dr. Tang began, flipping through the journal's yellowed pages. "It speaks of an earth deity, an ancient, restless spirit, that dwells near banyan trees. When certain conditions align, an inauspicious day of death and improper burial rites, this spirit can attach itself to a corpse, reanimating it. We call it Ma Trang, or Queen Ap Trang in some stories." Gwyn's face paled. "Are you saying my aunt has become possessed?" Dr. Tang sighed. "I pray not. But we must consider the possibility that something unholy is using her likeness. Old folk tales warn that if a body is buried on the wrong day, or if the funeral is not done properly, a wandering spirit or demon can enter." He showed Gwyn a passage describing rituals to ward off possession, placing kandao, mulberry branches in coffins, using special talismans, ensuring the grave is sufficiently deep and blessed. "Did you or the elders place any charms or protective branches with her?" the old historian asked gently. Gwyn thought back to the hurried funeral. "No. It was raining so heavily, and the day was overshadowed by worry. I didn't realize. They both fell silent. Outside, the wind hummed low, as if listening. Dr. Tang traced his finger along a line of text. If the spirit is awakened, it might grow stronger each day, especially as it approaches a critical period. Some texts mention the 100th day after death. Gwyn's heart quickened. She died only 3 days ago. We have time. Dr. Tang pressed his lips together. Perhaps. But we must be vigilant. Already there are reports of sightings and eerie voices. If it escalates, the spirit may fully inhabit the corpse and roam freely after dark. It will feed on life energy, sometimes from animals, sometimes from people. A chill settled in the room. Gwyn rubbed his hands over his face. I won't let that happen to Aunt Bitch's memory. His voice trembled, but determination filled his eyes. Tell me what I must do. That evening, they performed a small cleansing ritual at Gwyn's house. Dr. Tang recited old incantations while Gwyn sprinkled salt at the doorways. They placed protective talismans across windows, reciting prayers for the ancestor spirits to guide and protect. The entire time, Gwyn fought off the feeling they were being watched from the garden. Night fell, the sky an unrelenting black. Lantern light wavered in the breeze. By midnight, Gwyn could barely sleep, fear and adrenaline coursing through him. Lying on his mat, he stared at the shadows on the ceiling. Then, from the backyard, came the soft cluck of a chicken. A split second later, that cluck ended in a strangled squawk. He rushed out with an oil lamp. The lamp's light revealed a battered chicken coop, the door unhinged. Feathers littered the ground. Something had torn the latch away with surprising force. The footprints in the mud were deeply pressed, shaped like a human's bare feet. But the stride was awkward, almost loping. A sense of horror welled up. Gwyn's mouth went dry as he remembered the legend. A reanimated corpse might feed on small animals first, preparing for the final stage. He stumbled back indoors, heart pounding. As he bolted the door, a faint voice rode the wind, Kuyan. The syllables twisted, garbled, as though spoken through water. In the gloom, the talismans fluttered on the wooden beams. Gwyn prayed they would hold until he found a solution. Over the next week, sightings of a ragged figure multiplied. Several families discovered their chicken coops ransacked, and 2 dogs went missing. Children were forbidden to stay outdoors past sunset. The entire community was on edge. Dr. Tang, accompanied by a local spiritual medium named Madame Ran, took it upon themselves to investigate the graveyard. They found the soil around old Mother Bitch's grave was always soggy, even when the sun came out. One corner of the coffin lid remained exposed, no matter how many times people piled more dirt on top. Deep claw-like furrows marred the wood. By the time they approached the coffin to place wards, they noticed something dreadful. The coffin was empty. Only scraps of Bitch's burial clothes remained inside, alongside tattered shrouds. Some force had taken or animated her body. A wave of nausea swept over Dr. Tang. He turned to Madame Ran, whose face went pale as she traced the shape of a protective sigil in the air. That confirms our worst fear, she whispered. The corpse roams at night. They placed fresh warding talismans around the grave, a ring of salt, and tried to anchor a large mulberry branch near the disturbed coffin. But Dr. Tang feared it might be too late. Returning to Gwyn's house, they broke the news gently. He slumped onto a wooden bench, feeling dizzy. So, Aunt Bitch's body is out there, he said in disbelief. Madame Ran nodded. Not truly your aunt anymore. Something else has claimed her shell. The spirit of the Red Earth, or maybe an older demon. We must find a way to banish it before it grows too powerful. Gwyn's eyes burned with tears. He recalled how kind Mother Bitch had been, all the affection she showed him over the years. To imagine her body desecrated by a demon was unbearable. How do we stop it? Madame Ran exchanged glances with Dr. Tang. First, we must locate it before dawn. Such entities typically fear sunlight. Second, we'll require an exorcism at the coffin site, returning the body to rest. But we need a crucial item to anchor her true spirit, perhaps a keepsake, something that meant a great deal to her in life. Gwyn rushed to rummage through Mother Bitch's old wooden chest. Among tattered blankets and heirloom bowls, he found a small jade comb, a family relic passed down for generations. She cherished it and would groom her long gray hair every night with it. Madame Ran smiled thinly. That might work. We'll use the comb to summon her soul, reminding the body of who it truly was. Once the spirit glimpses its mortal ties, it weakens the demon's hold. Plans were set. They decided to wait for the following night, believing the entity would appear again to hunt. Dr. Tang prepared an elaborate chalk diagram on the ground of Gwyn's yard, while Madame Ran readied her incantations. Gwyn clutched the jade comb, steeling himself for the confrontation. Dusk fell swiftly, the crimson sun dipping behind the jagged limestone hills. The weather turned gusty, carrying a metallic tang in the air. Villagers gathered in their homes, lanterns extinguished to avoid drawing attention from the roaming corpse. In Gwyn's yard, a single lantern glowed faintly. Dr. Tang, Madame Ran, and Gwyn hovered near the circle of salt and chalk patterns. The smell of incense hung heavy. Every so often, they would glimpse a shape lurking beyond the fence, half hidden by tall grass. Midnight approached. The wind rustled bamboo leaves, creating a constant, eerie susurration. A distant dog barked, then abruptly stopped. Tension crackled through the air like an electrical current. Then it came, a hunched silhouette loping toward the fence. Moonlight revealed old Mother Bitch's figure, but changed, her limbs stiff, shoulders contorted. Her once kindly face was gaunt, cheeks sunken, the skin an ashen hue. The eyes held an unearthly gleam. She clutched something wet and stringy, like the remains of a small animal. A breathless hush fell over the watchers. Gwyn's stomach roiled in horror. Despite the dreadful appearance, the shape unmistakably wore the tattered Aoba Mother Bitch was buried in. Madame Ran lit a bundle of dried herbs and began chanting, words reverberating in the enclosed yard. The entity's head snapped toward the sound, eyes flaring red. It crept closer, releasing a low hiss. Dr. Tang gripped a mulberry switch, brandishing it. At the sight of the branch, the figure recoiled briefly, letting out a guttural moan. The air felt charged, as though the creature emitted waves of malevolent energy. Gwyn stepped forward, trembling, the jade comb in hand. "Aunt Bitch," he called softly. "Remember who you are, or who you were. You took me in when I was just a baby. You taught me everything." He held out the comb, and for an instant, something flickered across the corpse's hollow eyes. It froze, arms rigid at its sides. Madame Ran chanted faster, beckoning Gwyn to move closer to the circle center. But the wind gusted violently, snuffing the lantern light. Shadows leaped across the yard. A shriek tore from the entity's throat, more bestial than human. It sprang forward with alarming speed, ignoring the mulberry switch. Its bony hands grasped Gwyn's shoulders, nails digging in. Fear paralyzed him as he stared into the face that once belonged to his beloved aunt. He saw no recognition there, only hunger and rage. "Remember the comb," he whispered, tears streaming down. The creature snarled, jaws snapping dangerously close to his neck. Dr. Tang lunged, pressing the mulberry switch against the creature's back. Madame Ran flung a pinch of enchanted powder into the air. The figure convulsed, shrieking, releasing Gwyn. He stumbled away, scraping his knees on the rough ground, still clutching the jade comb. Now partially cornered, the reanimated body attempted to scale the fence. Yet the chalk diagram glowed faintly, forming an unseen barrier. It hissed and spun around, seeking another path. "Hold it here," Madame Ran ordered, voice resolute. She extended her arms, chanting a litany in Old Sino-Vietnamese. Dr. Tang poured a bowl of blessed water at the entity's feet. Steam rose where the water touched, as though the ground burned. For a fleeting moment, Gwyn saw the creature's expression twist in agony. The orbs of its eyes rolled, lips pulling back in a silent roar. The jade comb in Gwyn's hand began to emit a strange warmth, as though resonating with the incantation. Before they could complete the binding, a sudden wail from outside the yard distracted them. A neighbor, too curious for his own good, had crept close to watch. The entity's attention snapped to the fence line, drawn by fresh prey. With an inhuman leap, it vaulted over the half-broken fence and vanished into the darkness, leaving behind a trail of muddy footprints. "Damn," Dr. Tang cursed, panting. "We almost had it." Madame Ran lowered her arms, exhaustion lining her face. "It's strong. Stronger than I feared." Gwyn felt sobs rising in his throat. "Is there another way?" Madame Ran closed her eyes, pressing trembling hands together. "We may need to trap it at the grave, where it was first reanimated, and perform a final rite. But that's far more dangerous. If it feeds on another living being, it could grow even stronger." The night stretched on, thick with fear. They knew the confrontation was merely postponed, and the demon that possessed Mother Bitch's body was still at large, lurking somewhere among the moonlit fields. By dawn, rumors were rampant. The neighbor who had screamed was found unconscious near a bamboo grove, clothes torn, with bruises on his arms. He babbled incoherently about red eyes and a face of death. Desperate, the villagers organized a meeting in the communal house. Many demanded a spiritual solution, others proposed a more brute force approach, tracking the creature down with torches and spears. But the monster was too cunning, vanishing at the slightest sign of large gatherings. Dr. Tang insisted on caution. We're dealing with a malevolent spirit, not a wild animal. Physical attacks might provoke it further. I believe it has taken refuge in the hills. Madame Ran agreed. There is an old cave system near the top of that limestone ridge. It might be hiding there during daylight hours. Gwyn volunteered, though fear gnawed at him. I know the path. Aunt Bitch took me up there once to gather herbs. A small group formed: Gwyn, Dr. Tang, Madame Ran, and 3 sturdy young men from the village, each armed with mulberry switches, lanterns, and jars of blessed water. They ascended a winding path that led through a dense bamboo thicket. The air grew stale. Oddly, no birds chirped, and no insects hummed. After an hour's climb, they reached a limestone outcrop riddled with jagged openings. The largest cave entrance yawned like a hungry mouth. Strange scratches on the rocks indicated recent disturbance. The stench of decay wafted out, turning their stomachs. Inside, the cave was damp and dark, water dripping from stalactites. Their lantern light revealed a scattering of bones, chicken bones, possibly dog remains, partially gnawed. Gwyn nearly retched. In a corner, they spotted something grayish-white, half hidden by a rock. They advanced slowly, hearts pounding. It was indeed old Mother Bitch's corpse, sprawled on the cold stone floor, eyes open, body twisted unnaturally. The flesh on her arms looked partially decayed, but her face was locked in a dreadful grimace. The sight sent a wave of sorrow through Gwyn. Madame Ran lifted her lantern. Be careful. It might be feigning. Too late. The corpse's eyes gleamed red. With a rattling breath, it reared up, shrieking with a sound that echoed off the cavern walls. One of the young men yelped and swung his mulberry branch, but the creature was unnaturally agile. It scuttled across the floor, mouth gaping. Dr. Tang hurled a handful of blessed water. Steam erupted where droplets struck the corpse's arm, forcing it back. Gwyn, though trembling, held the jade comb high. Aunt Bitch, come back to us. Let go of her, demon. For an instant, the creature flinched. Then it lunged at Gwyn, claws outstretched. One of the young men bravely tackled it from the side, mulberry switch pressed against its chest. It shrieked, convulsing, but battered him away with horrifying strength. Now. Madame Ran cried. She began a powerful incantation, voice reverberating in the tight space. Dr. Tang drew a circle of chalk dust on the cave floor, the lines luminous in the lantern glow. The body of Mother Bitch tried to leap out of the forming circle, but Gwyn and the other men blocked it with mulberry switches. Enraged, it let out a keening wail that reverberated inside everyone's skulls. The walls seemed to tremble, bits of loose stone rattling. A swirling wind manifested in the cave, tugging at their clothes. The chalk dust circle glowed brighter. Madame Ran's chant grew in intensity, calling upon ancestral spirits and ancient guardians to bind the demon. Gwyn forced himself to meet the creature's fiery gaze. With shaking hands, he extended the jade comb. The lantern light sparkled on the green stone. "Aunt, if you're in there, please remember. You gave me hope when I had none. You taught me how to be strong." For a fleeting moment, the demon stilled. Then the lips that were once Mother Bitch's parted, and a whisper emerged, "Kuyan." The voice was layered, half human, half monstrous. Seizing the moment, Madame Ran cast a small pouch of ash across the chalk circle. The circle flared, and the entity let out a final bone-chilling scream. Gales of wind whipped around them, nearly extinguishing the lanterns. With one last burst of fury, the possessed body slammed itself against the boundary. The demon's red eyes locked onto Gwyn in vengeful rage. Then, as if an invisible hand yanked it backward, the figure collapsed in a heap. The unearthly wind died out abruptly. Silence descended. The body lay motionless, limbs slack. All that remained was the faintest breath of stale air and the lingering odor of rot. Gwyn sobbed, tears streaming as he knelt beside the body. The face slackened, some measure of peace returning to its features. "It's over," Madame Rand whispered, though her voice trembled. "We should bring her home and give her a proper rest." Exhausted but resolute, they carried Mother Bitch's body down the hillside. Dawn's first light spread across the ridges, painting the sky a pale pink. The villagers below, alerted by the previous night's commotion, watched anxiously as the small group emerged from the bamboo thicket. A hush fell over the onlookers as they beheld the decaying remains of their kindly elder, draped in a cloth. No one questioned the explanation. Rumors of Ma Truong had long circulated, and they recognized the shadow that had befallen Ban Truong. Under Madame Rand's guidance, they prepared a new coffin, this time with all the necessary rituals, lines of salt along the edges, mulberry leaves within, and protective talismans on each corner. The body was wrapped in fresh linen that had been blessed by the local monk. Gwyn placed the jade comb gently in her hands, a final keepsake for her journey. Before sealing the coffin, Dr. Tang read aloud from ancient texts, urging the restless spirit to move on. The small crowd that gathered joined in prayers. Many wept openly, remembering the kindness Mother Bitch had shown. At midday, they buried her anew, choosing a higher and drier patch of land. This time, they buried the coffin with care, reciting incantations to ward off evil. The grave was ringed with stones inscribed with protective symbols, and a fresh mulberry branch was placed at the headstone. As the final clod of earth settled, a warm breeze stirred the banyan leaves nearby. Instead of the oppressive gloom that had haunted them, sunlight streamed down as if a blessing. Gwyn felt a gentle peace wash over him, the sense that Aunt Bitch's spirit had finally found rest. Days passed, and the dreadful sightings ceased. Animals ceased vanishing at night. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, and Ban Truong slowly returned to normal life. Rice fields turned golden, children played in the lanes, and the marketplace hummed with cautious optimism. Gwyn carried on with a subdued heart, but also with renewed determination. He planted a small mulberry sapling in the yard, tending it daily in memory of Mother Bitch. Dr. Tang resumed his teaching duties, though he always kept an eye out for unusual omens. Madame Rand continued offering spiritual guidance, her reputation strengthened by their victory over the demon. One evening, Gwyn sat alone on the porch, sipping tea. The wind rustled the mulberry sapling. He fancied it sounded almost like a gentle laugh, Mother Bitch's laugh. A tear escaped him, but he smiled, grateful that her soul was now free of the curse. Though the threat had passed, no one in Ban Truong would ever forget that moonlit shape and the red glow of unnatural eyes. The story became legend, a reminder that certain forces, once stirred, can latch onto the living and the dead alike. Yet it also stood as proof of the village's resilience. In their darkest hour, they had come together, armed with love, knowledge, and courage. A season later, the fields were lush after the monsoon rains. Harvest time approached, and Ban Truong thrummed with busy energy. Gwyn, having grown more adept at farming, worked diligently with neighbors to gather the ripening rice. Late one night, as he was returning from a distant paddy, a familiar hush stole over the path. The moon hung low and fat, painting the road in pale silver. He paused near Mother Bitch's new grave, intending to pay his respects. To his surprise, he saw a faint figure standing by the headstone, a woman with long gray hair, wearing a simple alba-ba. For a heartbeat, fear spiked in him. But then he noticed the figure's posture was gentle, not twisted or menacing. She held a radiant jade comb, which glowed softly in the moonlight. Gwyn's voice caught in his throat. "Aunt Bitch." The woman offered him a tender smile. A sense of warmth, akin to a mother's embrace, filled the night air. She moved her lips, but no sound emerged. Instead, Gwyn felt the meaning in his mind. "Thank you. I am free now." Tears brimmed in his eyes. He bowed respectfully. When he looked up, the figure was gone. Only the breeze remained, rustling the tall grass. The grave stood silent, protected by its circle of stones. A wave of quiet relief and a strange, joyous sorrow overcame him. That night, he slept peacefully for the first time in many moons. No nightmares, no dreadful voices. The next morning, he found the mulberry sapling had blossomed unexpectedly, tiny fruits dotting its branches, a sign of renewal, a living testament to Mother Bitch's memory. The story of old Mother Bitch and the Ma Truong lingered in Ban Truong's folklore for generations. Some retellings grew more dramatic, filled with monstrous details, while others focused on the enduring love that banished the evil from her corpse. But all versions agreed on one point: beyond the veil of the known, hidden in old banyan groves and caves, forces lurk that feed on weakness, grief, and fear. And only through unity, compassion, and knowledge can a community drive back the darkness. No one forgot the lessons learned: to honor the dead properly, to respect the ancient customs, and to remain vigilant when uncanny omens rise. For in the remote corners of any land, especially one with red earth soaking up the rains for centuries, there are mysteries that defy reason, mysteries that can stir at the faintest disturbance. And so, in Ban Truong, they keep the lanterns lit on rainy nights and place mulberry leaves at fresh graves, remembering always the night when the dead walked again and threatened to consume the living, until love and courage said otherwise.